Hey everybody, this is video 2 of chapter 3. We're in week 2, and first I want to make a correction to something I said in video 1. We were talking about Carlos Ghosn of Nissan, and I said that I thought that he was started in the 80s, but it was the late 90s, so I looked it up to make sure. So I just wanted to correct that. So with this video, we're talking about organizational structures and how information sharing is different between a vertical and a horizontal organizational structure. So that information sharing is built into the design, and it's different between vertical and horizontal in that with vertical it's more about control, and with horizontal it's more about coordination and collaboration. So we're going to talk a little more about that. Also, we're going to be using the words centralized and decentralized, which we talked about a little bit last week. I just want to review what those are. With the centralized decision making, the decision making authority is at the top of the organization, so used more in those vertical structures. And the organization will have more specialized tasks. So, in other words, be more of a mechanistic design. Remember, we used that word last week. The structure is more vertical. It has a more formal reporting system. And remember, we used the word formalized last week, referring to the amount of documentation that an organization uses. It has an emphasis on efficiency. So we're kind of bringing all those concepts that we talked about last week and applying those to organizational structure. So those are in a centralized design. And in a decentralized design, the decision-making authority is brought, instead of at the top, it's brought to lower in the organization. The lower level managers have more authority or more autonomy to make decisions than in that centralized system. The emphasis is on learning and adaptation and shared tasks and knowledge, and there are fewer rules. It's just a little bit more organic. So that's the decentralized system or decentralized design. So first of all, we'll talk a little bit more about the vertical ones. With both vertical and horizontal structures, you're going to see linkages between, in vertical, it's between the levels. Horizontal, you have some levels too. But in horizontal, it's kind of more between the either departments or divisions. And so those linkages are referring to the communication that happens between those levels or those divisions. With vertical linkages, it has more to do with the rules of reporting relationships. So things are a little more like we've talked about, there's those rules and you want to follow that reporting relationship carefully. You don't want to go above somebody's head and break etiquette and that kind of thing. So people at lower levels of the organization don't have access to people at higher levels of the organization in a vertical structure. So think about somebody who's a checkout person at Walmart does not have access to a vice president or the CEO of Walmart, right? They're kind of just, they have access to their manager in their store, and that's about it, right? So that's an example of vertical reporting relationship or a vertical structure. Let's see. So the lower levels, in a vertical structure, the lower levels are going to carry out activities that meet the upper level goals. So the top executives set what the goals are, and they pass those down and tell the VPs are telling the managers or the regional managers and so on and so forth, and then the managers of the stores or whatever those locations happen to be are trying to meet those goals that have been passed on to them. So that's the vertical. A system, the vertical information systems, just to differentiate what a linkage and versus a information system is. The system includes it's more of a structured thing. So there's periodic reports, there's written information, the data is distributed to managers. It makes the vertical communication a little bit more efficient, and it provides a little bit more access, but depending on what level you are, you would only have access to certain things in that vertical information system. Okay, and then if we look at the horizontal linkages and the collaboration, So in a horizontal structure, horizontal communication, so we're talking about communication between divisions and between departments, overcomes barriers between those departments and provides opportunities for coordination and for collaboration. So what happens sometimes with the divisions or the departments in an organization is, depending on how they're structured, people in a certain department it kind of operates as a silo, and if they're not communicating with other departments, they're just kind of working on their own thing. They're not as efficient or as effective because they're not collaborating and using the expertise of other managers in other areas and how to make their product or their service better. So this is especially true in a functional structure, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But that one is more vertical, so that happens. But with those horizontal linkages, communication and coordination across departments happens much more easily. So an example that they talk about, I think this is on page 94. I thought this was a great example from the Chrysler company. Lee Iacocca, he pushed horizontal coordination when he started there. So they had 35 vice presidents when he started. Each of them had their own turf. And when a person or a department views their information or their area as turf, and kind of protects it, and we're not sharing information, they're not helping the company because they're not collaborating. So Lee Iacocca came in and he said, I'm just going to read the quote to you, even though you can read it in your chapter on page 94, but it says, "What I found at Chrysler were 35 vice presidents, each with his own turf. I couldn't believe, for example, that the guy running engineering departments wasn't in constant touch with his counterpart in manufacturing. But that's how it was. Everybody worked independently. I took one look at that system and I almost threw up. That's when I knew I was in really deep trouble. Nobody at Chrysler seemed to understand that interaction among the different functions in a company is absolutely critical. People in engineering and manufacturing almost have to be sleeping together. These guys weren't even flirting." So this is a quote by Lee Iacocca when he started at Chrysler in the 80s. So he really pushed horizontal coordination to a high level, and obviously was very successful with that. So vertical and horizontal linkages, you're not going to actually see them written into an organizational chart, but they are obviously essential to the effectiveness of the company. So some methods that organizations use to provide horizontal linkages. One is an information system, and we did mention this with vertical structures as well. With horizontal structures, those information systems are not everything, but information is more accessible to more people. It's not as limited. So that's information systems. And then you've got liaison roles. And this is when a person in one department is responsible for communication with another department. So it kind of links two departments together. So that's a liaison role. The next one is task forces, and this is a temporary committee set up to solve a problem. So just as you're kind of doing your environmental scanning and you see something maybe on the horizon coming up, and then you put together a committee of people just for that problem. And once that problem is solved, then that committee would disband. And then you've got teams, which are on a more permanent level. So a task force, that's a more permanent thing. And let's use the environmental scanning example again. You might have a team of people who is employed specifically to do environmental scanning. And what that is, if you remember back when we talked in chapter 1 about the external environment, environmental scanning is always looking for information and being aware of what's happening in the external environment. So again, that external environment, including those categories of the political legal systems, the economy, your sociocultural factors, your technology, and your competitors. So you might have a team of people that's always doing environmental scanning. And then the last method they talk about for used to provide horizontal linkages is a full-time integrator. And this would be people who are employed as project managers. So you're not employed in a specific department like engineering, but you're the project manager on a specific project. So you bring together the engineering and the marketing and the manufacturing and whatever all departments are involved in that project, and you are accountable for how that comes together. Take a look, if you haven't, at the How Do You Fit the Design on page 99. It's about the pleasure and pain of working on a team. I think we can all relate to the things we like and the things we don't like about working in teams. And then the last little bit I want to talk about is relational coordination, and how this is different than just those linkages and that regular communication. So relational coordination is a little bit more abstract. It's not as structured, and it just means that part of the actual organizational culture is that the organization communicates and collaborates with each other. The employees at all levels have access to each other, and it's like I said, built into the culture of the organization. So because of that, because it is so built in, because it's such an important part of it, they offer a lot of training in the areas of communication, conflict resolution, anything related to how to foster that communication. So it's really important, obviously, as it's part of their culture. It's important to know that it's costly to do that, and that in terms of time and in human resources, training, all of that. But it's necessary to uh, to have that effectiveness of what that communication provides. So that is it for video 2. Um, let's see. Our last video is going to be a little longer because we'll go through all the different styles of organizational structures, and we'll see you on that one.